a 13-year-old girl, in the final moments of the worst night of her life, in a burning yogurt shop in Austin, Texas. She fought back, and underneath her fingernails, so small, so fragile, so easy to overlook, she left behind the DNA of the man who killed her. For 34 years, nobody tested it properly. 34 years of the wrong men being arrested. The wrong men being interrogated for hours, until they said things they did not do. The wrong men being convicted, sentenced to death, sent to prison. Their entire lives dismantled by a justice system that was absolutely certain it had the right answer. It did not have the right answer. Amy Ayers had the right answer, underneath her fingernails the whole time. On the 26th of September 2025, the Austin Police Department stood at a podium and said something that the families of 4 teenage girls had been waiting 34 years to hear. We know who did this. His name was Robert Eugene Brashers, a serial killer and rapist who had been operating across multiple states throughout the 1990s. A man who had been stopped by Border Patrol less than 48 hours after the murders, driving westbound on Interstate 10 between El Paso and Las Cruces. A man who died by suicide in 1999 during a standoff with police. He had been dead for 26 years before anyone connected his name to 4 teenage girls in a burning yogurt shop, and 4 innocent men had their entire lives taken from them in the space between those 2 moments. Today, we are going to Austin, Texas on the night of December 6, 1991. We are going to meet Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy. We are going to follow 34 years of one of the most devastating wrongful conviction stories in American criminal history. And we are going to ask the question that a retired detective said still gives him insomnia 30 years later. How does something this wrong go on for this long? Before we go to that yogurt shop, before we stand on the corner of West Anderson Lane and North Loop Boulevard, and understand what firefighters found when they walked through that door on the night of December 6th, you need to know who these 4 girls were. Not the case file, not the evidence bags, them. Eliza Thomas was 17 years old. She worked at the I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop with her best friend Jennifer. On the night of December 6th, she was closing up. The end of an ordinary shift in a strip mall off a busy Austin road. The kind of evening that a 17-year-old girl does not think twice about. Jennifer Harbison was also 17, Eliza's co-worker, her best friend. She had called her younger sister Sarah and their friend Amy and asked them to come by so they could all head home together after closing. Sarah Harbison was 15, Jennifer's little sister. She came because Jennifer asked her to, because that is what sisters do. Amy Ayers was 13 years old, the youngest, Sarah's best friend. She came along the same way best friends always come along, because there was somewhere to be and someone who wanted her there. 4 girls, closing a yogurt shop, on a December Tuesday in Austin, Texas. That was all they were doing. Robert Eugene Brashers walked through that door, and by the time firefighters walked through it hours later, the shop was on fire and 4 teenage girls were on the floor, tied up with their own clothing, shot in the head, at least 3 of them sexually assaulted. Eliza Thomas, Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Amy Ayers, 17, 15, 13. The investigation that followed was the kind of investigation that happens when a city is traumatized and law enforcement is under enormous pressure and the answers feel like they should be right there, just within reach, if someone pushes hard enough. The pressure produced the wrong answers. Within a week of the murders, 16-year-old Maurice Pierce was arrested at a local mall with a gun matching one of the murder weapons. He was questioned. He gave a confession during hours of interrogation. Then he recanted. Investigators noted his confession did not match the actual details of the crime scene. He was released. In 1999, 8 years after the murders, a new task force came back to the case. They brought in 4 young men: Maurice Pierce, Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, and Forrest Wellborn. All of them had been teenagers at the time of the crime. All of them were interrogated. Springsteen and Scott confessed, implicating each other. Then they recanted, said they had been coerced. said the confessions were not true. It did not matter in the courtroom. Scott was convicted. Life without parole. Springsteen was convicted. Death row. 2 young men. Convicted of 4 murders they did not commit. Sentenced to die. And to spend the rest of their lives in a Texas prison on the strength of confessions that did not match the physical evidence, and that both men said from the first moment they were free to say it, were lies extracted under pressure. A 2004 Supreme Court ruling granted new trials. Investigators, preparing for retrial, ordered advanced DNA testing on swabs taken from the victims. They were looking for anything that connected Springsteen and Scott to the crime scene. What they found instead was a YSTR DNA profile, an unknown male, someone who had been in that shop on the night of the murders. It did not match Springsteen. It did not match Scott. It did not match any of the 4 men who had ever been accused. Charges were dropped. Both men were freed in 2009. Not exonerated, freed. A legal distinction that meant they could theoretically be retried if new evidence emerged. 4 innocent men, years of their lives taken, and the actual killer still unnamed. Here, right now, before we go any further. Because we just crossed into the part of this story that deserves its own moment of stillness. 2 young men confessed to murders they did not commit. And those confessions, which both men said were coerced, which did not match the physical evidence of the actual crime, were enough to send one man to death row and another to life in prison. So I want to ask you something directly in the comments right now. What do you think about confession evidence? After hearing this case, after understanding that 2 men confessed to killing 4 girls they had nothing to do with, do you still believe that a confession is the strongest evidence a prosecutor can have? Or does this case change something about how you think about that? Tell me, because this question sits at the center of wrongful conviction cases across America. And your answer matters. Subscribe right now. Hit that notification bell, because this case had a major new development in February 2026. 4 men were fully and formally exonerated by a judge, and this channel covers every development as it happens. Share this video. 1 share, 1 more person who hears Eliza's name, 1 more person who hears Jennifer's name, 1 more person who hears Sarah's name, 1 more person who hears Amy's name. Now, let us talk about the detective who cracked this case open, and the drain, and the bullet casing that had been sitting in it for 34 years. Detective Daniel Jackson was assigned to the yogurt shop cold case in 2022. He came to it fresh. No emotional investment in the theories that had been built and torn down before him. No attachment to the narrative that had sent 2 men to prison. Just a case file, a storage room full of evidence, and the specific kind of detective mind that looks at everything that has been done and asks, what has not been done yet? In June of 2025, 3 years into his assignment, Jackson was reviewing the evidence inventory with fresh eyes. He found something. A .380 caliber bullet casing, recovered from a drain at the crime scene in 1991, logged, stored, preserved, and never submitted to the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network. NIBIN, the federal database that links firearm evidence across crime scenes nationwide. Never submitted. For 34 years, Jackson submitted it in June 2025. In July, a hit came back. The same gun had been used in an unsolved murder in Kentucky in 1998. A case with a similar modus operandi, a similar victim profile, a similar pattern of violence. Jackson began working with Kentucky investigators. They started building a picture of who might connect an Austin yogurt shop in 1991 to a Kentucky murder in 1998. And then, he reached out to DNA labs across the country. He had the YSTR profile from the crime scene, the unknown male, the profile that had excluded every previous suspect. He asked labs if they could manually search their databases for a match. 1 lab responded. The South Carolina State Laboratory. They had a match. Robert Eugene Brashers. Robert Eugene Brashers was born on March 13, 1958. He had a criminal history that stretched back years before the yogurt shop murders. In 1985, 6 years before December 6, 1991. He had been convicted of attempted murder for shooting a woman. He served time. He was granted parole in 1989. 2 years later, he walked into a yogurt shop in Austin and killed 4 teenage girls. After the murders, he was stopped by U.S. Border Patrol on December 8, 1991. Less than 48 hours after the crime, driving westbound on Interstate 10 between El Paso and Las Cruces, he had a story. He was released. He kept moving. In 1992, he was arrested for vehicle theft and other charges. More time in custody. More releases. Throughout the rest of the decade, he left a trail of violence across multiple states. Sexual assaults, murders, cases that were unsolved and unconnected at the time because nobody had a name to attach to the DNA profiles being preserved in evidence rooms across the country. In Kentucky in 1998, he killed again. On January 19, 1999, a standoff with police in an unrelated case. Rather than face arrest, he shot himself. He died, and whatever secrets he was carrying went with him. For the next 26 years, his name sat in a South Carolina DNA database, unknown, unconnected, waiting, until Detective Jackson submitted a bullet casing from a drain. When the Austin Police Department announced Robert Eugene Brashers as the suspect on September 26, 2025, investigators made another statement that reframed the entire 34-year history of this case. They said Brashers' DNA was also linked to multiple other unsolved murders and sexual assaults across the country throughout the 1990s. Cases he was never charged with. Cases whose victims never received a name. At least 8 confirmed murders, possibly more. Women and girls across Kentucky, Missouri, South Carolina, and Texas. Targeted, assaulted, killed. Left in apartments and cars and on roadsides across the American South and Midwest throughout a decade when Brashers moved freely. Convicted of relatively minor offenses, while the DNA from his worst crimes sat in evidence rooms with no name attached. The system had him, multiple times, and every time, he walked back out. A detective named John Jones, who worked the original yogurt shop investigation in 1991, told reporters something that should stop every person watching this video. He said, "I still have insomnia." 30 years after the fact, a detective, 30 years of insomnia. Because 4 teenage girls closed a yogurt shop on a Tuesday night, and a man the system had already encountered multiple times walked through the door. On February 19, 2026, a judge in Travis County formally declared all 4 previously accused men innocent, not just freed. Innocent. Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Maurice Pierce, Forrest Wellborn, 4 men. Between them, years of their lives consumed by interrogations and trials and convictions and appeals and the specific, grinding psychological weight of being told by a court of law that you killed 4 people you never touched. Springsteen had been on death row. Now, innocent. Their attorneys indicated they were discussing restitution and considering civil lawsuits. The state of Texas was going to have to reckon with what had been done in the name of justice for 4 teenage girls in ways that had nothing to do with justice at all. Barbara Ayers Wilson, the mother of Jennifer and Sarah Harbison, said something at the press conference after the suspect was announced that I cannot stop returning to. She said, "We never wanted anyone to go to jail or be charged with anything that they did not do. Vengeance was never it. It was always the truth." A mother who had waited 34 years for the name of the man who killed her daughters. Who had watched 2 innocent men be convicted in their names. Who had spent 3 decades saying, "This is not right. This is not who did this." And being ignored by a system that was more committed to the confessions it had extracted than the truth it had missed. It was always the truth. Here is the second place I need to stop today. Because this case is not finished. Not in the way that a name and a DNA match and an exoneration finishes things. Robert Eugene Brashers is dead. He has been dead since 1999. He will never stand in that courtroom. He will never look at the families of Eliza Thomas and Jennifer Harbison and Sarah Harbison and Amy Ayers and be forced to account for December 6, 1991. 4 innocent men had their lives taken from them in the process of getting to this answer. And somewhere across Kentucky and Missouri and South Carolina and Texas, there are families of other women Brashers killed, whose cases have not yet been officially connected. Women whose murders are still listed as unsolved in police databases. Women whose families have been waiting not 34 years, but potentially longer. So here is what I want from you in the comments right now. What do you think justice looks like for Amy Ayers, for Eliza Thomas, for Jennifer and Sarah Harbison? Does a dead man's name attached to a DNA profile, give their families what they needed? Or is justice something that required a living person in a courtroom and a sentence that could be carried out? And what do you think about the 4 men whose lives were taken? Does exoneration in 2026 repair what was taken from them in the 1990s and 2000s? Tell me, because those questions do not have comfortable answers, and they deserve to be asked out loud. Subscribe to the Cold Case Signals. Ring that notification bell. Share this video. One share. One more person who says these 4 names. One more signal sent back to December 6, 1991. Amy Ayers was 13 years old. She went to a yogurt shop on a Tuesday night because her best friend's older sister was working the closing shift, and they were all going to walk home together. She was 13 years old, and she had enough fight left in her final moments to scratch at the man who was killing her, to leave his DNA underneath her fingernails, to give Detective Daniel Jackson, 34 years later, the confirmation that broke this case open. A detective stood at a press conference in Austin, Texas in September 2025 and said something directly about Amy. He said, "It was Amy's fighting back that solved this case. I am sorry that it took 30 or 40 years for us to get here, but we are here now, and Amy's final moments on this earth were to solve this case for us. It is because of her fighting back." 13 years old, fighting back, and winning, 34 years after the fact, from underneath her fingernails, in a laboratory in South Carolina, through a database match and a detective who asked one question nobody had asked before. Have we tested everything? Eliza Thomas, Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Amy Ayers. 4 girls who went to a yogurt shop and never came home. 4 families who spent 34 years carrying a weight that the justice system was supposed to lift and instead made heavier. 4 names that were attached to the wrong men's confessions for years, while the right man drove west on Interstate 10 and lived another 8 years and died with a gun in his hand before anyone connected his name to what he had left behind in Austin. They deserved better. They deserved the truth on December 7, 1991, not September 26, 2025. But the truth came. Amy made sure of it. Before you go, I want you to leave one thing in the comments. Just one. Not a theory, not an analysis. Just tell me one thing this story made you feel. Because I think the most important response to a case like this is not a debate. It is a human reaction. And I want to know what yours is. Subscribe to the Cold Case Signals. Ring that notification bell. Share this video. One share. One more person who hears Amy's name. One more signal. We have more cases coming. More signals. More stories told the way they deserve. With depth, with truth, and with absolute respect for every person at the center of them. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next video.